Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large.
And this is Ruth McLeod, the Southern Atheist.
And this week we are going to be bringing you part 2 of our interview with Joe Szimhart. This week we'll be talking to him about cult intervention. He has done a lot of work in that field, has helped a lot of people out with that, and we're going to go over a lot of the details and specifics of how he goes about doing that. But this last week, there were some really tragic losses in the world. We thought we might comment on a little bit of that.
It was basically just a shitty week all around for entertainment.
Pretty much. We had David Bowie, of course, first there was Lemmy from Motorhead.
Right, Lemmy.
And I don't know that I've ever even listened to a Motorhead song. So I understand that a lot of my friends on Facebook really felt that. Really,
I grew up with it in the car with my dad in his car.
So rough go for that. And then of course David Bowie dies. And that was suckage. I was never a Bowie fan either, but I certainly was well aware of who he was.
You kind of had to be.
Well, he was everywhere.
And there was somebody tweeted or somebody wrote somewhere, you just didn't think about life without this person in it.
Well, basically, that's exactly right. And even Simon Pegg's tweet that I posted or retweeted or whatever was sort of along that line of being lucky to out of all the billions of people who have ever lived.
Consider yourself billions of years that you could have lived.
Right.
We're considered lucky we lived in the same time frame as this man.
As David Bowie, that's right. Yeah. So, and I feel that, and of course, everybody remembers Labyrinth.
Of course.
And he was awesome in that.
I think Labyrinth was everyone's first little sexual tingle that you weren't really sure what was going on.
Well, it wasn't mine, but
no.
I mean, maybe for Jennifer Connelly actually, but not so much for David Bowie. No.
Oh, I know plenty of very, very straight, solid men who are still curious about Bowie.
Fair enough. Maybe some guys, but not. No, I never really went there with him.
That sounded like a story with him.
Well, we're moving right along now. And of course, then today, as we're recording this, Alan Rickman died, and also of cancer, just like David Bowie.
69
years old.
I need people to go check on British entertainers right this very moment.
Right. And Rickman definitely hit me hard because I've been following his career and seeing a lot of his movies ever since Die Hard, which was his breakout year.
Yeah.
He had been. I actually looked him up today and wrote a little thing on him. He'd been heavily involved in the theater through the 70s. Mm-hmm. Was a graphic artist.
Yeah.
That was fascinating to me, and then he got into movies, and of course he didn't want to be typecast as a villain. He only played 2 villains, early on.
And it's funny because I grew up knowing him in Harry Potter, and then I saw Love Actually, and depending on who you talk to, he's kind of a villain in that one, but he's still a family man, and it was still just kind of like.
Yeah.
He's a nice guy, and damn it.
Exactly.
And then, of course, if anybody saw Dogma.
Yep. Which he was awesome in.
What are you going to do? Hit me with that fish?
Exactly.
Perfect.
He was just so good in all of those. So he really hit me hard, and I'm gonna really miss the world without him in it.
Yeah.
So a little bit of mourning going on here, but on a brighter note, just out of nowhere, Bernie might be doing good in the polls.
I'm telling you, I'm starting to see more and more media coverage on Bernie, and there was actually something that I read this morning that says it's time to take Bernie seriously. It's like,
yes,
welcome to what the rest of us have been saying for about a year and a half, dude.
Exactly. Feel the burn. Yeah. So that's kind of where there's a little bit of bright spot there, at least for us. And now we're going to, without further ado, get straight into our second half of the interview with Joe here. So take it away.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Ruth.
Hi there.
Hey, so
Good.
after last week's education on the kind of cult background and theosophy and Madame Blavatsky and all that interesting stuff, we wanted to talk now about you're a cult intervention specialist, right? You started out deprogramming, that sort of thing. Now, I don't think that kind of work is really done. The image people have of taking somebody against their will and forcing them in a hotel room, all that kind of crap is sort of ancient history now. So what is your experience with this, and how does this sort of thing work as in a broad sense?
Well, okay, you're talking about intervention.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are in the general public are familiar with interventions with alcoholics and drug addicts and people with addiction habits like gambling, or hoarding. We see that a lot on television. Cult intervention is not shown very much at all. I mean, there's very few things on television done with that over the years. It's a difficult thing to portray. So let me just go through a typical case that I've done of many, many hundreds. Let's say a family will contact me about their adult child, and the daughter has graduated from college. She's looking for work, and she gets involved with let's say some guru. Let's go back to one dead one now, Rajneesh or Osho, back in that day, and gets all excited about it, and suddenly is changing the way she dresses and all of that, and spending all the family money and that she gets and contributing it to the group, and the parents are alarmed. Okay, they've got this really bright daughter, and maybe her sister and brother are alarmed also, and she's saying she's fine and all of that. So they get her to come home and visit after a year, and they plan this intervention. And the intervention is basically that I'm waiting down the street somewhere or in a hotel nearby. Let's say I'm with an ex-member, which is kind of typical. And the family says, sweetheart, we really need to talk to you about this whole thing with the group. Would it be okay if we talk to you a little bit? And then there's a knock on the door, and brother opens the door, and in I walk along with a former member, and they say, by the way, we invited someone to help us discuss this. Okay, so you can imagine the scene. The cult member is frozen. They know that the parents are pulling off some kind of an intervention, and they don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? They do a number of things. Sometimes they don't do much of anything. They're curious, and they just want to know what we're going to do, what we're going to say. So we sit down and start. In other cases, they get on the phone immediately and call the group. What do I do? My family, called these people here. Anyway, anything can happen. Normally, they do stay and talk. The reason is that I prepared the family very well on how to introduce the whole thing. We've met for a whole day or two, and to go over exactly what's going to happen, what we're going to try to cover, so the family's comfortable with the whole thing. So my role at that point is to try to get rapport with someone that really doesn't want to talk to me. It's not always easy, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's never easy. But over the years, I've done pretty well with it, and people in my work have to be able to do pretty well with it, or else they get out of this line of work really quickly. And the reason that you do these interventions by surprise, and in most cases, people just won't show up if they think the family's going to have some kind of a consultant there. They want to know who they are. They want to look up the information, and of course, if somebody looked up my name ahead of time, they'd never come home.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing they might Szimhart, right? So it was done by surprise, and the one thing I've always done when these surprise interventions is I try to calm the person down and say, listen, if you don't want me in the room at any time, just let your family know or let me know and I'll leave. I'll go back to my hotel. And so I try to give power back to that person as well as I can, because by surprising them, you take power away from them. It's a violation of their presence there in a way. They didn't invite this. So anyway, my role is then to try to get. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm really glad to hear you say that you're giving them power, because that speaks on many, many different volumes for people, I think.
Yeah, and I'm also trying to get them curious, by giving them the right to kick me out or whatever, ask me to stop, or, they might want to leave, but you can't stop them if they want to leave or go talk on the phone to somebody. Mm-hmm. My job is to try to explain why the family is concerned, and get the family members to talk, get them to talk. One of the things I try to do in the beginning is explain what the group is about in group language, and in a way that pleases the group member. In other words, this is how they would explain the group, and sometimes I can tell the family more about the group than even the group member knows. That isn't negative. So I've had to have done a lot of research. So I try to explain, this is what we're talking about. Okay, this is what the problem is, or what we think the problem is. And that might go on for an hour or two, but what I'm doing, or what we're trying to do is just get that person to understand that we respect the way they think. We may not agree with it, but we can talk in their language. We understand why they're there, and so there's positive things about why they're in the group, and the family has to acknowledge that. Okay, so now you turn a corner, and the family has to bring up, what they're concerned about, and so you start into that aspect of it. So these conversations, if they're going to be successful in what I said before, and showing the fly the way out of the fly bottle, because I'm not there to get them out. That's something I tell the family. I'm not there to get anybody out of a cult. I'm not there to do that. I'm there to show them the way out. They have to make some choices if they think they want to leave. So, what is the way out? Well, the way out is to understand that the transcendent message that they're getting maybe isn't so special. Maybe the form of Hindu teaching that Rajneesh is giving them, or the stuff that he's been teaching them that comes from Gurdjieff, or the stuff that he teaches them that comes from Zen or Tantra or whatever, this is a mistaken form of that teaching. And maybe the teacher himself that he's quoting from, Gurdjieff, can be deconstructed. I get the person into a conversation that expands their point of view, all right, about the whole transcendent message. We kind of look at, you look at the idea of the authority figure, and what makes him the authority figure? Who gives that stamp of approval? Is it just because you believe it, or is there some evidence that gives him that authority? Is there some peer review going on among other gurus that are established in spiritual teachings that acknowledge this guy? Well, after a while you find out, no, it's just that he says what he says, and there doesn't seem to be anybody out there that, is a committee that approves of it. So you look at the authority figure and how that operates, and you try to get the person to look at other groups at that point. I might pick another guru and say, let's look at this guru on why do you think there's something wrong with this guru? So by looking at another group critically, you can get them to begin making parallels. Then the other idea is, why are they in such an orbit around this? What makes them feel like they have to be there? To do all this kind of work and sacrifice and money, and does dynamic meditation that Rajneesh teaches, does that really give you what they say it's giving you? Let's look at it. Let's look at the psychological forces going on. So these conversations go back and forth for hours, and you try to keep them interesting. Typical intervention on day will go from 8 to 12 to 13, 14 hours of interaction. I mean, it's you got to have some stamina to do that kind of work.
And I'm glad.
And then you
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you hope. Yeah, you hopefully get into the next day and the next day, and at some point, if a person's really curious about what you're saying and does have some ambivalence themselves, which most people do, they have a little bit of ambivalence about the group they're in, even though they're totally into it. The wheels might begin to turn, the emotions might begin to relax a little bit about being defensive, and it's almost like some kind of a crisis point comes up in the person's mind, and they begin to. What I notice in the interventions, a person will begin to talk about the group in the past tense suddenly. Not saying they're out or anything, but they'll say things, I remember when I did that, and it's kind of like what you're saying now. So they're able now in their language use, they're looking at it in the past tense, which tells me they're exiting inside. Something in them is beginning to move away. Their future is not in the group. And so you just keep working it and seeing what they choose, So, I've worked with some people for 5-6 days in a row and they went back to the group after they've heard everything. So it doesn't always work that way that they choose out. But the idea is to show them the way out. Whether they go out or not, is going to be up to them. So that's the basic idea.
And I'm glad to hear just some reiteration of something that we learned a few weeks ago with Rachel Bernstein about when talking to someone in this situation, it's really... You try to make it into a conversation where they explain to you their feelings, their thoughts, and you're not just shouting at them, telling them how wrong they are. So I'm glad to hear just some more confirmation that, yeah, you need to know your background, or you need to know the background so that you can come at it with a very logical argument, but getting their side of it and having them explain it to you is an interesting tool, and I'm glad I'm hearing that used as a regular tactic, and I like that.
Yeah, all it really is again ordinary conversation. That you, if you want to have an ordinary conversation with someone, you have to show them some respect.
Absolutely.
And if you're trying to get someone to reject a house, let's say, looking as a metaphor, and you want to let them know why they need to reject this house, you need to be inside it, because that's where the things that are wrong. You got to go from room to room. You got to know how it's constructed. You have to understand why the certain paint was used. You have to understand why, how to explain how the foundation's sinking over here. It's not done very well. You have to know about the masonry, the electricity in it. In other words, you've got to know what goes on inside the house for a person to say, you're right, this place is a mess. I really shouldn't be living in here. And, you just can't be outside throwing things at the house and telling them it's no good. I mean, you don't want to insult your client or the person in the group. You want to show them some respect. They got into the group for what they thought were good reasons, and you want to honor that part of them while trying to expand their point of view. So it's a tricky business. They know you're there to try to, quote, get them out, unquote, but the idea is that you're trying to share information to help them choose a different way of looking at it. Whether they leave or not is not the point.
Right.
I think this is way, way, way more important than a lot of people actually realize in listening to this, because this applies to, we're talking about cult intervention right now, but this applies to just about every social issue and disagreement issue that people have out there. Is if you could have that level of tolerance and compassion and understanding, I think we would have a lot more mutual understanding going on between what are now very violently feuding groups, because there is this rock-throwing, antagonistic, you're just wrong sort of attitude, between groups. And I just see this, just all day, every day. And it's an important point. I think it should be underlined, highlighted, italicized, bold-faced, capitals. Like, the only way you're going to change somebody's mind and get on a path of even having a possibility of doing that is through tolerance, compassion, and understanding, and peaceful communication.
Treating other people like
respect. Yeah, exactly.
But it also helps to know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
No, for sure. That's the other half of it too. Is
Yeah. Let me give you another example, which is a little more current in the news. For the last 10 years, we've had this whole terrorist thing, ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call it, in the Middle East, and it's not well known to people in the West because it's not exploited very much as far as what happens. But there's a lot of moderate Muslims in the Middle East and very well-educated imams and clerics within Islam, what some of them have been doing very successfully, these young radicals will get arrested over there, and they're in the prisons, and these these teachers or these clerics will go in and talk to these young people and educate them about the Quran and how that can be applied in a sensitive, real way to current times, which is what has been done with the Quran all along. There's nothing new about that. I mean, even in the early days, it was being interpreted. So what happens is they de-radicalize these young prisoners, and they're actually safe to be released. They get deprogrammed by these really respectful, sensitive, very intelligent clerics.
Well, I really like that term. I was just about to say that I think I prefer de-radicalized over deprogrammed.
Well, they get de-radicalized, but they get de-radicalized through education.
Right.
And that's the whole component of this whole thing. A lot of people in education sometimes gets a bad rap because you force people to have to go to school and all of that, or for instance, the re-education camps in communist China and all of that. But in effect, it's what we call education in a true university sense that allows us to live in a free ethical society and develop a kind of healthy tolerance. I mean, there is such a thing as unhealthy tolerance. You can tolerate things that you shouldn't be tolerating.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that's what I call stupid liberalism. You don't want to be stupid about it.
Right.
But there is an intelligent way to be tolerant, and it takes a lot of work and education to be that way. You just don't get that way. You're not born that way. There's a reason why we have brains, human beings, because this brain is used to sort things out, to make judgments, to be creative, to sort out what's right and wrong, and all of that. It takes work, and you can come to some kind of agreement that makes sense to people, that's workable, that's healthy, that's kind and benign. I recall hearing back in about 5 years ago on television people interviewing a student in Cairo when there was a big Egyptian uprising and all the protests were going on and all of that. And the American reporter asked the kid, intelligent young Egyptian kid, maybe 20 years old, what's going to change all this? How is this going to change it? And he just said one word: education. And I know what he was talking about, which is exactly what I'm talking about now, or what we're talking about. It's a real healthy, broad education of everything from what the Quran is and what it means and how it applies to culture, about other cultures, about society, about science, about all of that stuff. I mean, it just takes work. Education is not easy to do, but it's really rewarding. When people learn something and they know how to use it, they're proud of themselves. It's good for self-esteem. This is the kind of thing that's going to change things. But if you like our fundamentalist Christians, for instance, in America, they're really kind of anti-education. They don't want the Bible to be interpreted through hermeneutics and through eisegesis and exegesis and all that sort of thing. They want it as a concrete brick that it fell out of heaven into King James' hands and he handed it to us, and that's how it is, That's how
I preach it, man. I'm telling you, I am like loving what you are saying right now, because
Chris and I are both just nodding.
We're just nodding and nodding, because what you're saying is just it's just gold, It's and it's not just the radicalized Muslims that over in the Middle East that need this kind of education on the Quran. I'm telling you, I think this I believe relatively small percentage, but group of Americans over here who preach violence and hatred and intolerance toward all immigrants, for example, this Trump group, these guys, they need a real sit down education on what it is they think they hate, because I'm almost guarantee that what they think they're fighting against has nothing to do with what they're actually protesting,
Yeah, what that's called is a straw man argument, that a lot of people will use.
What? You mean this is addressed in critical thinking?
Yeah. And you find a lot of cults using that about their enemies. They set up a straw man and then pretend they know their enemy.
Right.
By constantly harping about people being intolerant or something against religion, when in fact you're merely being critical about a stupid religion.
Well, I'll tell you, Scientology certainly does that. They pull out the religious persecution card at a drop of a hat when the things that people are protesting about Scientology actually have nothing to do with its religious status. And that's just something I'm intimately familiar with. So, as soon as you said that, I went, yep, seen that.
Yeah. So that's really typical. And we see this in politics where, the Liberal Party will set up a straw man conservative that they talk about and all over. And that straw man conservative doesn't really exist. In the same way, the conservative, like, the talk show hosts, they have a straw man liberal that they keep attacking, on the air. And that straw man doesn't exist, but that's their target.
Right.
So it makes for fun listening for people that believe in that sort of thing to ridicule their opponent. But it's not educational. It's not really a teaching way of looking at the political scene or why there might be value in some kind of rational exchange between these polarized points of view.
Right.
That's a real difficult sell during an election year because, it's almost like a football game. You have to be on one team or the other.
Yep.
You can't play for both teams.
Right. And it's funny, too. Sometimes the education can come from just an experience. Like my father right now, hardcore redneck from southern Louisiana, outdoorsy, would rather be fishing and hunting than doing anything else, lives in Saudi Arabia right now for his job. He's been there for a few years. And whenever he comes home, he goes and he sees all his friends, and they always ask him, "Oh, Saudi, it must be crazy down there with all those damn Muslims," and they just go on and they try to get my dad to get in with him, and my dad just goes, they're just regular people, just going to work, just doing normal stuff, just like us, trying to make money, trying to make a living, trying to do good for their family. And it floored me the first time I heard my father say that, because I thought he was so set in his ways. You can't teach this old dog new tricks. And just from his experience, he just...
What you're saying is interesting, too, because, most people have this stereotype of what kind of people are in cults. Now, if I had that stereotype in my mind, I'd never be able to do my job.
Right.
I wouldn't see a human being. I'd see a straw man or a straw woman, right?
That's right.
So I see a human being, Chris, I don't know if I told you this before, but just as an example, in the middle of my career doing these deprogrammings, when my wife and I were flying across country, and I'm in the middle seat and she's on the aisle, and next to me this guy in a cheap gray suit, he's like maybe 40 years old, and I have a book on Buddhism that I'm reading. I opened it up, and the guy next to me starts commenting, noticing I have a book on Buddhism. And he says, my religion has a Buddhist basis. And I go,
I so know what's coming right now.
To make a long story short, for the next 2.5 hours, I'm listening to the Scientologist telling me about Scientology. And
Right.
I never had a clue who he was talking to.
Right.
I was just be respectful listening to him, kind of exchanging ideas about, Buddhism doesn't quite teach that. And I had him listen to me a little bit. And then, but it was just basically a pleasant talk. I didn't try to make him feel uncomfortable. My wife is rolling her eyes, and oh my God.
I was waiting for a little bit of an intervention to happen.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I wasn't getting paid to get him out of anything.
Right.
Like, no,
You're on your own, buddy.
I don't want to work that hard on an airplane.
Right. Well, hey, getting back to interventions, I just, we actually on this show, we preach a lot about, or talk a lot about, the tolerance and understanding and whatnot. And it's nice to hear that from somebody who's been in the field actually practicing that and getting results with it, because I know that that's true, and I know that that is what's going to get results. So I really wanted to highlight that. But getting back to your experience doing these interventions and getting people out, what kind of advice do you have for families or friends out there in terms of what would be some things you'd say to make sure that they might want to do and things that they might not make sure they don't do in talking to or relating to somebody they might know who's in a destructive cult?
Yeah, one thing I advise is don't think you can talk them out of it, and don't think that showing them, sending them emails with websites against the group is going to help. Once a person has entered into that transcendent message and absorbs it and feels good about it, or feels like, it's something they want to do, they're in a world where the opposition now is contaminated, and they're not going to want to listen to it because it's not pure, or it's not true, or it's not healthy for them to listen to it. So the family's mistake in trying to educate them out of it by sending them information, sending them a book, or even arguing with them is kind of like just saying, how could you be so stupid for getting in there? And they feel very insulted, inside the group. So my advice is, just try to be as neutral as possible if you think something strange is going on. Try to be as tolerant as you can until you learn exactly what's going on. Short of joining the group yourself, which I don't recommend, go visit them, listen, read a book or two, or accept the tapes they send you, or internet connections that they want to show you what they're doing. In other words, at least act neutral. Don't overreact, and do your research. If you can find someone that's expert in that group, try to talk to them. But the key here, what I'm really talking about is, don't give them an excuse to break off communication, because once that happens, which is probably 90% of the cases that come to me, that's already happened. I'm on the 11th hour. This family's desperate. They've been cut off. They say, listen, we just did all the wrong things.
Right,
can you fix it? And now I've got a mess on my hands to try to get back in there and try to build up communication again. It can take a long time, if ever, that we get a chance to where they can introduce me or someone like me to have an open conversation.
When you say it can take a long time, I'm just curious. I just want to interject for just 1 second. Like, how long? I mean, we're talking about, could it take months?
Yeah, months is average. Once communication is broken down and you try to get a family to reestablish some kind of neutral territory again between them and their cult member, wife, husband, son, daughter, grandmother, whatever. I mean, these people come in all ages. It can take months, and in some cases up to a year or more. If it stretches on longer than that, it's very difficult to even get an intervention going. And I have some people in my files, a lot of them, that have been waiting for 10, 15 years to try to do an intervention. Wow.
I just wanted to bring that point up because I suspected that was the case. And, the idea that you're going to have we're going to sit down and have a come to Jesus moment or something is just a very unrealistic expectation that I think probably people might get from TV or the movies or something. But real life doesn't work that way when it comes to, getting somebody dislodged from a situation of undue influence like that.
Part of it, Chris and Ruth, it's the luck of the draw. I'll give one example, and I've done a few of these cases where I've done group deprogrammings or exit counselings. There was a group in New York that was an acting a cult for actors, and it was run by this guy who was involved with the Ramtha cult at one time back in the 80s, and then he started his own thing in New York, and he was kind of an actor when he was younger, or a singer. And he got these young people involved in a kind of a class, therapy, to help them become better actors and all of that. Well, the therapy was about him analyzing them using the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatry. And supposedly helping them to go deep into their lives, to erase all that bad stuff that their parents did to them and their churches did to them and the government did to them and schools did to them, in order to come up with a more pure product to present themselves for auditions. Well, they never went through auditions. They kept going back for weekly therapy, and they're anyway, long story, they had a cult going on there, a therapy cult, based on wanting to become better actors. One of the older sisters of one of the young actors, went in for about 3 months, and she decided there's something really wrong here. She did some research. She got a hold of me. I kind of coached her from the side. I told her this is what's going on. This guy's a malignant narcissist. He's gotten these people involved in him. She talked to her brother, and the group began talking to each other. 8 of them decided, that's right. This guy is that, because I gave her a paper to just have them pass around, and they decided on their own to kind of move away from the guy. And she convinced them to do a workshop with me up in New York. So I, met them and did an all-day thing with them twice to kind of help them debrief from their situation. Now, 3 or 4 of the people in that group wouldn't come. And this was about 10 years ago. They're still in it. They're still involved with this guy.
Wow.
So
Wow.
They were given the same information initially of the main group that emerged from it, but they wouldn't leave for whatever emotional reason they had. And it can work very dramatically, just a little information, and then reinforcing that by strengthening their questions. That's all I did. They emerged from the group, but they were really confused at that point. So I'm helping to help them overcome their confusion about what happened to them, in the workshops. So that's a way that this can be done.
So when there's a situation like this where you do either a single or a group intervention and it may not take, is there like a grace period and then you try again, or is there, like, what are the thoughts behind that? What is the process, or is there even a process?
Well, if you try an intervention and people in a cult and it doesn't go well, the person goes back to the group, you probably that's the only shot you're going to get.
Okay.
As far as intervention is concerned, you're done. That person, I've had interventions where they backfired, where they didn't work in the sense of the person leaving. They go back to the group, and 5-6 years later they leave the group. And they agree with all the information that the family and the ex-member and myself tried to share. And I've even met people, years down the line where the intervention failed and now they're out, and now I, befriend them a little bit, So I don't know if the attempted intervention helped them to leave or not, but, something about the group didn't sit well with them after 4 or 5 more years of being in, and they left. And they come to their senses and they begin to look at the cult model, and then it begins to make sense for them. So some people do it that way. Okay. But I've rarely ever seen where a second attempt at intervention does anything. You can't even pull it off usually. They won't show up, or they'll leave right away.
So you kind of just hope for a seed of doubt to be planted and maybe it will flourish?
Well, yeah, you hope for that. That's a kind of a saying. But if you look at an old parable that even Jesus said, it comes from another story. But that you can sow seeds, but seeds have to fall on fertile ground for them to do anything.
Yeah, that's true.
All rocks, they blow away, or the birds come and take them away. And the birds come and taking the seeds away is what happens when, for instance, you do an intervention, you've spent a whole day, you've gotten some information through, they go back to the group, and the group debriefs them what happened, and they take all the seeds away. They're the birds that take all the seeds away, and they don't have anywhere to grow.
Yeah.
Well,
speaking from personal experience on that, I know that it can take a long time for some of those seeds to go deep and grow into something. And in terms of my process, it wasn't overnight. It wasn't a year. It wasn't 2 years. It was more of a 10-year process for me when the first seeds of doubt showed up. But had I not gotten some of those other external pieces of information, I don't know that whole thing would have developed into something that was strong enough for me to go. So I do believe from my own experience that every little thing that can be done does matter and does potentially make a difference.
Yeah, people retain it. They retain. They hear stories inside these groups or cults why people left, and they're told not to believe it. But it does stick in their memory, and later on they might find that the reason they left is a good reason.
That's right.
The leader really was hiding $1 million in the bank, or something like that.
Exactly. Getting back to the advice, was there any other points of advice of things that people should or should not be doing if they have family or friends who are in a cult situation?
They shouldn't be campaigning against the group. They should stay off social media complaining about the group. They should try to find other families that have been impacted by that group and network with them, see what they've done. And that's helped a lot. There's a lot of these groups will have parents of or family members of people inside the group. They'll form their own little bond and organization and share information and support one another. So I mean, there's kind of a shock, a bereavement, anger, all that stuff goes on when you lose someone to something like this. It's kind of like having someone missing in action, and you want to kind of like get them back. Their personality is gone, more or less, and to help cope with that anger, cope with that confusion, it helps to share that with people going through the same thing. So I would recommend they network with people that have connections with that group or similar groups, and just form a support network for themselves. And that also can help in the long run for planning an intervention, because by sharing information, you find maybe the right people or the right ex-member to introduce to them, somebody that's really solid, that can really explain the whole thing and isn't just going to go in there and attack the group, that kind of thing. So yeah, that would be my advice as far as what to do and what not to do. But certainly don't try to argue the person out of it just because you think you're smart enough.
Right. And so, okay, good. So now, what kind of resources are out there for these family or friends to reach out to? You mentioned, or family members, whatnot. Are there any organizations or groups or individuals who specialize in this kind of thing, or that they can go to for education, advice, and direction on how to help their family or friends?
Yeah, there's a range of them. Some of them are a little more neutral toward the new religious movement stuff, but they do have critical information, like, for instance, Inform in England. There's other ones that have more critical information, like International Cultic Studies Association out of Florida. They have a annual meeting. The next one's in Dallas, where people from a dozen or a couple dozen more countries will send. They come, academics, people that research this, ex-members, therapists that are interested in this. They meet for these conferences and share papers so the ICS that's a fairly a good resource. There's Jewish Family Services in New York used to have a good clearinghouse to help people. Every country has set up something. Usually, Italy has their own cult awareness kind of center. Spain does. Australia does. These aren't big organizations normally. They're often staffed by volunteers or people that might get some kind of stipend from local churches or organizations to help them keep going. But there's not a lot of money in this business, so that's why you don't see the intervention business thriving. Or people that are just information centers.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because there's so much money in cults.
Right. But I would put out a warning. There are people out there that will claim they're cult interventionists and don't really interact with people like me very much, and they will ask for, like a $10,000 retainer or a few $1,000 retainer just to get the case going. Don't go there. These people aren't lawyers with a law firm behind them. You got to be very careful where you spend your money when you're trying to do an intervention in this, because there are people that unfortunately, not that many, but that have that aren't trained very well in the business that claim they think they can get people out, and so
you got to do your homework for sure.
Really got to. For instance, if you look up something called the Cult Awareness Network now, that's run by Scientology.
Right.
And they claim to help you regarding a cult problem. And the reason it exists is it's in Los Angeles. And in 1996, the original Cult Awareness Network got sued out of business by Scientology. It was sued 50 times. They just beat them to death in the courts. And they ended up, the business went on the blocks. And the only person bidding on it was a Scientologist, and so they got the name, the number, the logo, everything.
Wow.
And so all these old books that are out there from before 1996 that put the Cult Awareness Network as a resource, if people pick one of them up or find something old on the internet that says that contact the Cult Awareness Network, they're going to reach a Scientologist now that's going to pretend to help them.
Wow.
And all they're going to do is gather information and maybe even warn the person that you're trying to get out of the cult. The family's trying to get in touch with them. I don't know.
So have you run into some legal situations doing this?
Legal? Yeah, I've been sued by a large martial arts cult in Houston in the early, and that was thrown out of court, but it cost me money.
I bet.
Hire a lawyer. I've been charged criminally in Idaho for allegedly kidnapping someone from a large New Age cult. I didn't do the kidnapping. They were abducted before I got there, but there was an agreement to talk with me and two others that even the police knew we were out there talking to her at the time. But anyway, it was a long trial, and I got acquitted of all charges along with the people that were on trial with me.
So
wow.
That's just another complication that could possibly happen. It sounds like.
Right. You can
right.
be sued. And the other thing, you can be harassed by the group you're criticizing. One thing, I'm not as paranoid. I've never hidden my address, my phone number, my name. I don't use pseudonyms on the internet. I've never done it. I don't play that game. I don't know. It's perhaps it served me well because I don't get harassed anymore. I have been harassed by cults. I've had calls in the middle of the night. I've had, that kind of bullshit. But, I work in a psych hospital. I deal with crazy people or people that are really in bad shape mentally all the time.
Yeah.
It's my job, and I don't get rattled by prank calls or whatever that might happen. So, but in any case, I'm not saying nothing can happen. That I'm not that stupid, but I don't try to hide from the world.
Right.
To protect myself from that kind of thing. If you're going to get into this business and think you're going to have to work, as some kind of a spy or cloak and dagger sort of thing, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah, right. Would you say, just to wrap this up, would you say that there are any specific resources or books or places or educational materials that anybody who's listening right now would go to or could go to get a good education or well-rounded look at this subject?
Yeah, if you're going to just read two books, A Cheap Investment, I from the sociological angle, I'd recommend reading Dr. Janja Lalich's book, Bounded Choice. It gives a good idea of what a cult is from a sociological model, her bounded choice model. And the other one is called Brainwashing, the Science of Mind Control by Dr. Kathleen Taylor. That gives a scientific view of what we mean by brainwashing and how it works neurologically in the brain, and why what we call cults really makes an unhealthy brain. It's not functioning right when you in that kind of an atmosphere. So So, if you want to educate yourself about it, go to those 2 books and see where it leads you. But, there's lots of other good resources, but those are, be my recommendation.
Awesome. Well, Joe, listen, this has been definitely very educational and very interesting, and I can't thank you enough for agreeing to come on twice with us to do this. And I think this has been quite an education for our listeners. So thank you again.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's good chatting with you, and see you again sometime.
All right.
Thank you, Joe.
And so that was our interview with Joe. And, we might very well have him back in the future.
Yeah.
And I wanted to let everybody know that we are lining up some other talent coming our way here on the Sensibly Speaking podcast.
Yeah, because nobody wants to listen to just us talk forever and ever and ever.
Pretty much. I
mean,
think
we could.
Yeah.
I can listen to myself.
I don't mind listening to you.
What?
But, we have some other very interesting guests coming. In fact, next week and the week after and into February, we're lining up some guests that I think there's some variety. This is not all going to be just anti-cult stuff. There's going to be some other very interesting topics coming up on this show that I think you folks will be interested in being getting exposed to, and we're looking forward to having these guests on. So if you have any questions or comments for us or our guests, feel free to leave them on a YouTube channel or on our website at sensiblyspeaking.com. I know Joe's been getting some really nice emails from the first part of our interview with him, so feel free to comment away or ask any questions of us. You can also email me or Ruth, Chris at sensiblyspeaking.com.
Or Ruth at sensiblyspeaking.com.
Okay, and otherwise, you guys have a great week this week, and we will catch you next week.
Thanks, guys.